I'd like to acknowledge a couple of folks that are key to our session today. Bill Adair is taking notes and will be providing the report back later this afternoon. And Yuan Vu is our timekeeper because I'm time challenged and need all the help I can get to keep on track. So for the rest of our time, the next 15 minutes or so, I think I'll facilitate a little conversation between our panelists, and then we'll open it up in the last 20 minutes for open discussion and questions. I really want to thank all our panelists for what they contributed, and I got like a million questions based on this, and we won't get through them. But when we look at our strategy, you know, one of the pillars is around adequate supports for people with disabilities. I want you to comment a little bit around the relationship between some of those supports that might be necessary. One would be income supports, a second would be employment supports, and a third is actual employment. So any takers on that question?
Sure, I'll jump in there. So a couple things. First of all, in Ontario, certainly, there's always been a challenge with the fact that if you have a disability and you receive ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program pension, in many ways it's a disincentive to work because those benefits often get clawed back if you start working. And I know this is part of the strategy of how can we decouple some of that, because people are scared of losing their benefits. And it keeps a lot of people out of work. But the other area that I think is not necessarily not served, but in my mind is certainly underserved, is employment supports aimed at that, a highly educated worker. Because I know when I graduated with 2 master's degrees, I went to an employment service provider, and in the 3 months of working for them, they sent me 2 jobs. One was as a Starbucks barista, and the other one was a security guard at the aquarium. Now, I'm a really bad barista, and I'm an even worse security guard. It's just not gonna happen. And so what I realized in that is that there is a group of people with disabilities who are highly educated, highly motivated, highly willing to work, but there's not necessarily targeted supports aimed at that group. And I think this speaks to a lot of what Dana was speaking to, in that it all gets lumped together in one giant blob, and that blob isn't always very effective.
Any other comments from the panelists?
I would just add that it was mentioned this morning, I think, by Mandy, about the desire to have more control, whatever the support is, whether it's income support or employment support, the feeling of having more control around how that support is spent, whether it's money or some other form of support. And I know in Newfoundland, they're looking right now at introducing an individualized funding model, which seems to be very positively received among persons with disabilities, and allow them to sort of make better, more individualized choices around how that funding is spent. So more control.
Thanks. It doesn't really relate to my talk, but as a late deafened person, the supports that I require are expensive. And, that's an elephant in the room, when you start talking about this. And as it happens, I lost my hearing about 15 years ago, and by that time I was working as a consultant, and I have done that really ever since. So I've worked mostly on my own at home, mediated by computers and things like that. And I occasionally venture out into public situations like this, they let me out once in a while to talk to people and things. And when that happens, I get the person or the organization that's doing the conference to provide the accommodations and so on. But if I happen to be a person, if I was a lawyer and I worked in a law office and I needed to have direct communication with a person all the time, that detailed, you know, it's not a kind of like somebody just writing a little note and stuff, but when I use captioning, it's a verbatim transcript of what's being said. And if I was working in a technical environment like that, and certainly when I've worked in technical environments like the drafting of the convention, when every word counts, you know, they argue over semicolons in a situation like that, and you really need to know what's being said in a very exact sort of way. So, you know, I think that something that needs to be, I guess the thing that sort of irks me when I listen to people talk is the sort of convention is to say, oh, accommodations are cheap, you know, it's going to cost you $50 one Tuesday afternoon in May, and then Bob's your uncle, it's going to be fine. That's not always the case. There are people who require significant accommodations, and I'm one of them. So, you know, as you move forward with developing a strategy, you talk about the different kinds of support, but also the different levels of support. I think it's important to keep that in mind.
I know for me, in the workplace, I needed, say I had to do filing because my accommodated position was a filing clerk. So I had to do filing with a low-level filing cabinet. So they had no problem going out, oh, we can get you the stool, you know, get the saddle stool, that works really good. And that was great. And I could only work 2 hours at a time. That's all my back would handle. So no problem. You can come in, you know, and do the 2 hours and come in another day and do your time and split it up and that. But that was as far as the accommodations really went. Like then when it came to anything more, the nitty-gritty stuff of the relationship stuff and that kind of thing, like that was just totally lost in the wind.
Thank you. So my next question is, kind of comes from my background in history. I took history at university. I'm a history buff. And what I've seen is that in terms of social change, it's usually driven by groups in society who are underrepresented, who are discriminated against. And it is those groups that are pushing forward and demanding change. Steve, you talked a little bit about one of the ways of advocacy using the UN Convention as a way to hold our own government more accountable. The other part of our strategy is around partnerships. And I'm wondering about, it's kind of a two-part question. One is, how do we build stronger partnerships between the various and many different organizations of people with disabilities? And what's our role in advocacy in creating the kind of future we want to have? Who wants to start on that to respond? Janet.
I'll start there. My official role here
Does this thing
is...
come on automatically, the microphone? Yeah, okay.
My official role here is I
The
am
whole
the
CRPD. Go ahead.
I am the office manager of the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance, and I see an opportunity for partnership there. I know the one thing I was thinking about, I think about a strategy, a platform for persons with disabilities, and I think about how compensation, like for, again, mine is with the injured worker focus there, but with compensation, and they don't pay attention to the human rights side of things. So I think about there now we look at as a disability platform, and again, I don't know if the importance would be there because they are all about dollar signs and that is it. So when I think that a strategy is something that is very important to have, but I think it has to be on a much bigger scale and not putting just the provinces into it, because every single province is, you know, they get their dollars down from the higher ups, and it's about making the dollar go further. Whereas if you go having a more, like, you know, with the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance, that is, it's a federal, it's a national organization, and their being is, the focus is for persons with disability, and they can gather the information, but they can also then use it as sharing it across the country.
Let's move right across the panel. So Steve, you wanted to plug in?
Yeah, okay. I'm always doing that, talking over people. My apologies to you. In terms of building collaboration between disability organizations, the whole process around the development of the convention and the reporting has been one of the big things that's come, is it brought us together. I mean, even in the days of negotiating the convention in 2003, 2004, what happened was Canadian disability organizations had to come together to comment on the different drafts of the text and so on. So we found ourselves in rooms like this, meeting and talking with colleagues from a whole variety of areas. I mean, the organization I'm involved with and have been for a long time is a cross-disability organization, the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. But through the work on the convention, we've come very close with organizations of injured workers, with people doing employment stuff, with organizations that work with deaf people, blind people, all of those kinds of things. Maureen talks about this process being one of getting in the boat and rowing in the same direction. And I think that's a really nice analogy. We're rowing in the same direction. So often we're almost at cross purposes with one another, you know? And I mean, but sometimes it's a zero-sum game. If my organization gets money, your organization doesn't, and things like that. That's a challenge that we deal with. But when you have this common cause, then I think it really allows you the freedom to kind of come together, and from that, relationships work and partnerships work and things like that. Great example is yesterday here in Ottawa, there were two kinds of circles of disability organizations having different meetings. One was with the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. We were talking about things related to the UN Convention in a sort of global way and reporting and so on. And then colleagues from People First and the Canadian Association of Community Living were having another conference down the road. Well, I talked with Krista Carr from CACL last night and said, you know, next year when we do this, okay, if you guys want to talk about your thing, that's cool, and we'll talk about ours, but let's do it in the same place. Let's build some economies of scale. Let's celebrate together. Let's do that kind of thing. So these kinds of mechanisms provide for those opportunities, and I think the convention is a real good example of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dana?
I love that metaphor, Steve, of rowing in boats sort of side by side toward the same destination, which is sort of what I was thinking as well around to build really strong partnerships. It's important to recognize that the various partners and stakeholders are coming from very different standpoints and perspectives, and they're bringing their own stakes and interests and accountabilities to the table, and they have to be recognized and respected. And I think creating the safe space where they can all be sort of disclosed, if that's necessary, is it really important in order to be able to sort of figure out how can you row together toward that single destination with those things in mind.
Tim?
Yeah, so I first of all, I'll say I agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said on this question. So I'm going to take a bit of a different tact on it, which is just to say that I think we also need to start looking at kind of the next generation of disability advocates. So who's doing really cool stuff kind of from the generation, you know, even behind mine in the disability space. So who's doing really cool stuff in high school? Who's doing really cool stuff in the university areas? Like from a student perspective, because that is the generation that are going to have this, you know, this, like the federal disability legislation for the majority of their lives, right? So that is the generation where this thing is really going to take flight. And, you know, the example I'll give, and if he knew I was giving this example, he would kind of smile wryly at me. Luke Anderson, who many of you might know as the founder of Stopgap. Stopgap is an organization that started in Toronto to provide brightly colored ramps for single-step businesses. And he goes and he gives these ramps to the businesses for free. They're made out of plywood. They're super visible. But like the work that Luke has done may not seem related to employment, but it absolutely is. Because now those businesses can hire someone with a mobility device. Right? Now those businesses have more awareness around disability. So let's look at partnerships that aren't your typical employment partnerships, both from this generation, but also, more importantly, I think the one behind us, because they're the ones that are going to have time to make this thing really sing.
Thank you so much. Now, let me open it up to the rest of the room. Questions, comments, discussion points?
Should have waited till I finished the candy.
Maybe introduce yourself
Yes,
too
hi.
when you begin.
I'm Anne McRae. I'm from Nova Scotia. And I wanted to get back to something that was said earlier around, you hear often it said that, and Steve alluded to this, that the cost of having a disability is, to accommodate a person with a disability is $500 or less. And I think there are a lot of people with disabilities that are on the sidelines because that cost may be more prohibitive than that. So how do we, from your perspective, either how have your employers accommodated your disability? And I guess what are the gaps that we need to fill in to ensure that it doesn't matter what your disability is, that you can be accommodated in the workplace?
Who wants to kick it off?
I'll kick it off, I guess, if no one else will. So, I mean, I can use a real-life example of me at this conference. So when I travel somewhere, to say I don't travel light is a bit of an understatement. I do require someone to go with me because I need to be rolled over and put to bed and all that good stuff. I do require a lift to get in and out of bed, things like that. And so for me, this being my first trip for CIBC, my new employer, or relatively new employer, I've been there for a year and a half, I was nervous kind of putting those expenses into our internal system because they're expenses that no one else has, right? No one else, when they go to an event for CIBC, need a lift to get in and out of bed. And I was happy that they didn't even bat an eye, and they said to me directly, you are the right person to be at this conference. We don't want to send anyone else, and we want to have a presence there. So if sending you costs, X amount more than it would someone else, then that is the price that we're paying to have our expert there. So that is a really positive example. But to kind of say, what can we do about it? I think there's a couple things. First of all, in kind of practical, real-world terms, I think that hotels need to realize that putting one lift in a hotel room would be a great idea and would be a huge moneymaker because then every person with a disability would stay there. Does anyone know how many hotels in Canada have a lift in them? Someone want to take a guess? Zero. It's a big fat zero. So if I want to stay in a hotel in... Oh, there's one? Oh, well, I should go out to Victoria then. I'll come visit you guys. That's fantastic. So, but the point is that if hotels start to do that, then more people with disabilities will start to go on business trips and have that exposure. And so I think that's where we need to get to. The interesting thing about employment is that everything else is connected, right? Tourism is connected. Transportation is connected. Employment, in many ways, is the hub of all of it. So everything feeds into what we're doing.
Thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Steve.
a lot of my work takes me to the United States. I have a lot of friends there, many of whom are women, and we talk about the situation they get themselves in when they decide to have kids. And in the States, you get maybe 90 days maternity leave, something like that. I talk to them about the situation in Canada where you get a year of parental leave and their mouth drops open. It's just, I mean, it's totally unheard of. It's a cultural norm here. A generation ago, it wasn't a cultural norm here. It takes societal change. We need to move as a society, and we have proven with a year of parental leave that we can do that, and we can do that without going bankrupt as a country. And when you talk about this now, where people say, well, I mean, it just is, right? Well, why isn't it just is for you and for me? That's where we need to get to, and I think it's long and it's slow, but that's the way that we need to move. So, you know, I'm glad you asked the question, Ann, and why I put it on the table too, because I think that we just need to get to a point where we understand that being disabled is as normal as anything else. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I get fed up with the whole differently abled business and the different this and all of that kind of stuff. And you were talking about the next generation of people, Tim, and it got me thinking about the whole idea around that you see emerging with the younger generation of disability activists around disability pride. And I think this is where we need to be going. You know, you need to be proud of the fact that you're a guy with CP, and that I'm a guy who's deaf. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to hide under the table. It's just a simple, normal part of everyday life. And when we get to that, when being deaf is a simple, normal part of everyday life, then it no longer becomes an issue to have interpreters or to have captioning. That's where we need to be going, I think.
Other questions? Oh, I'm seeing John Ray in the back. Microphone coming your way.
Well, unfortunately, Steve, I have to be the purveyor of cold water. Why is it always me? Anyway, I believe this morning you said that the strategy is an outgrowth of some of the activism that has happened over the past few decades. Unfortunately, I don't see much activism in it. In fact, I think it's a very timid document in times where timidity is the last thing we need. And in fact, I think a lot of the burning issues that need to be addressed aren't addressed in that paper. Things like what I call the disproportionately negative impact of precarious work on our community is not talked about. The disproportionate negative effects of some of the new technology. When some businesses buy new technology they know is inaccessible. They know it is when they buy it. Things like, my list goes on. And the two most important ones I'm saving for my time tonight. But I find that a lot of what's needed in that strategy, Steve, what's there, there's lots of interesting stuff in it, but I think a lot of it focuses on tinkering with what's been happening and not the kind of innovation that Tim suggests we need, or dealing with the burning issues that I suggest are largely absent from that document. And so I'm disappointed by it.
Thank you. And your comments are really important. Your thoughts, your experiences, your feelings about the strategy, don't hold back. Give us a blast.
John, I'll just say really quickly, it's Tim here in response to your comment, and thank you very much for being, you know, open and honest and being able to be that upfront with your thoughts. I think it's great. If we all agreed on it, it wouldn't need to be done, right? I think that there's so much, and I agree with you, this is a draft document, and there's so much that needs to happen from everyone in this room, everyone at this conference, everyone in this city, everyone in this province, everyone in this country, that needs to happen to get it to that next place. And I think the word that you used that I really appreciated there was timid. For too long, a lot of people with disabilities have been timid and have been really cautious in the way we ask for stuff because we don't want to rock the boat. Well, when you put my 600-pound wheelchair in a boat, it's going to rock. So I just accepted that a long time ago. And so I really appreciate your honesty and the honesty of your comment. And, you know, let's push it that extra mile.
Any other comments from the panelists?
I just wanted to say one thing to that listening. I kick myself because I had applied for a job as an executive assistant with that employer, and I didn't get it. And I went to the human resources manager afterwards, and I says, well, you know, can you tell me, you know, what were my strengths and what were my weaknesses? And she replied, oh, no, you were great, but we don't have to hire you, you know. And I think now listening to you, it's like, why the hell didn't I just go say, like, what do you mean you didn't have to hire me? If I was qualified, why would you not do that? Give it to an employee who's been 24 years with you guys, who knows your organization. So you're absolutely right. You know what? We need to stand up and just say, like, I know I'm going back to my employer and I'm going to say to them that I'm going to deliver them this draft strategy and I'm going to tell them where I've been, and it's time. They need to get with it.
Yes! Wait, I'm not supposed to be an advocate now. I think we have time for another question. Up here? Oh, I see two. Good, good.
Thank you very much to this panel and the discussion that it has generated. It's been fantastic. I do have a quick question in terms of the UNCRPD in Section 8, where it is to raise awareness for Canadians and the challenges that we experience and how to raise the culture on employment and the barriers that we face through attitudes. I'm wondering, you know, you've given me some thought on how that whole attitude shift can happen and how the barriers can be reduced for people with disability and trying to access employment.
Steve, you want to start?
I'll take a crack at
So,
it, sure,
yeah,
why
great,
not?
thank you.
Frank, I always say to people when they talk about awareness raising in the convention that, in my view, it's one of the kind of key things of the convention, the awareness raising thing. And it goes back to what I was saying to Tim a moment ago about the younger generation coming up and disability pride and things like that. It's a matter of shifting the way that we see disability. And the awareness raising they talk about in the convention, first of all, they talk about raising awareness, rather, of the convention itself. But they also talk about raising awareness of the importance of equality and non-discrimination in terms of people with disabilities. And I've been disappointed because I've thought to myself that awareness raising would be a really great potential way to engage particularly the private sector around the convention. They spend so much money in advertising and things like that. What if we were to take some of that and start to do advertising to talk about positive things around disability and disability accommodation and employing people with disabilities and that kind of thing? So I think it's a great idea and it's a great opportunity. It's one that really hasn't been taken up yet, but maybe now CIBC at least will start.
We most certainly will and have. And I'll just add really quickly, one of the things that I've always struggled with, and just being perfectly honest, is that disability is not often, it's often a very angry space. And we absolutely have a right to be angry, and we have a right to fight, obviously, and to be loud. But it also, to engage the people who've never thought about disability before, it also needs to be a fun space, right? If you go to the LGBTQ Pride Parade, it's a fun event. It is certainly about advocacy, but it's not only about advocacy. And it's fun, and it's a celebration, and it's a party. And as Stephen was saying, with the Disability Pride Parade, we need to make it fun enough for people to want to listen and come out just for the heck of it, and the awareness will seep into them.
I'm going to jump in too, because when I first lost my arm and I'm wearing my prosthetic limb, the group that would right away look and ask me questions was young kids. Everybody else was nervous and they didn't want to embarrass me or embarrass themselves, but the kids would go, oh, let me see that. And so I said, okay, part of my role is to be there and say, yeah, sure, here, look, this is how it works.
Right.
And by the end of it, they're kind of going, wow, I wish I could have one of those. In a way, I feel like that's part of the deal.
Absolutely.
I think we have time for another question in the back.
Hi. It's more of a comment than it is a question. My name is Nellie, and I work with the Disabled Women's Network. I just wanted to sort of bring to the attention around the strategy that we do talk about, systems of oppression in terms of ableism, even though we're not naming it that way in the document or in these conversations. But when we're talking about populations that we're working with at the Disabled Women's Network, which is women, we're also thinking about not only having the discrimination of ableism, but also sexism, racism, and all these other systems that come and affect how people can gain employment. So I just wanted to make that comment for everyone to be cognizant and aware that those systems also don't disconnect from ableism. So.
I'm going to see if any of the panelists want to comment on that too. I feel like the discourse, the language that we use that describes us, or sometimes we describe ourselves, has hidden meanings. And, here I got Tim who's kind of going, I've been lucky, to have a disability. And we were at a session earlier with CRWDP in November in Ontario, in Toronto, and we had an Aboriginal woman come who had a disability and said, in our community, we're seen as teachers because we can see things in a different way that benefits all of the community. So thinking outside the box, any thoughts, comments from the panelists?
Just a really quick one. I would absolutely agree with you that intersectionality is critical, right? And no one with a disability exists in a vacuum. I am a proud disabled man, but I'm also a man. I'm also, of a certain socioeconomic status, and so all of that plays into who I am. I would say for myself personally, and this is just my personal thought, the disability has become a larger chunk of who I am just because of the path that I've chosen to take in my life. But I would absolutely agree with you that, for organizations like the Disabled Women's Network, it's not only about, disability-based discrimination, it's about the glass ceiling in terms of gender, it's about all of it, right? So this strategy needs to make sure that it doesn't lose sight of who it's actually working for.
We have about 2 minutes left. Any final questions? Marjorie? Hang on just one sec.
Sorry. It's not so much a question as just a comment, I guess. I wanted to thank the panelists for acknowledging and speaking out about the fact that the disabled community is not a blob. We are each individuals, we are all different. We have our similarities, but we are just as diverse as the so-called non-disabled community. Right. So, yes, we are all different. And I am glad to see that that's, we're not losing sight of that.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's a great note to end on.
And I think we are just about out of time. I want to thank our panelists, Tim Rose and Dana House and Steve Esty and Janet Patterson.